It feels like the season hasn't even officially begun yet. And already there's a sense that things are getting messy behind the scenes. While everyone is focused on liveries, driver hype, and bold predictions, there's a much quieter story developing that could end up being far more important. Multiple Formula One teams are reportedly at risk of arriving late to the first behind-closed-doors test in Barcelona, and that alone is unusual enough to raise eyebrows. Testing is where everything starts to make sense, where theories meet reality, and when a team isn't ready to run on time, it instantly sparks questions about what's really going on back at the factory. What makes this situation so intriguing is that this doesn't seem limited to one struggling outfit at the back of the grid. The whispers suggest that several teams could arrive late, and possibly even one from the very top tier. That's where the word chaos starts creeping in, because top teams are usually the ones with the resources, the structure, and the planning to avoid exactly this kind of scenario. When they're cutting things this close, it tells you just how demanding these new cars really are and how tight the margins have become. Now, before this turns into full-blown panic, it's important to be clear about what late actually means. The Barcelona test has a flexible window, and teams don't all have to run from the very first day. Some might be deliberately choosing to delay their arrival to squeeze in extra preparation time, bring more complete parts, or avoid unpredictable winter weather. On paper, that sounds sensible. But when reports start mentioning unfinished components, delayed approvals, and cars that haven't even been fully fired up yet, the tone shifts from strategy to concern. Here's where I want your take, because this is one of those moments where fan instinct matters. If a team misses the first day of testing, do you think that genuinely hurts their season? Yes or no? Drop your answer in the comments, because opinions on this are always split. Some people say testing mileage is priceless, while others argue that showing up later with a better car is worth the risk. What's undeniable is that this uncertainty creates pressure. Engineers want data, drivers want laps, and leadership wants reassurance that everything is under control. When even one piece of that puzzle is missing, the tension builds fast. That's why this story matters, even if nothing dramatic happens on track right away. These early signs often tell us more than lap times ever will. If you want to stay on top of how this unfolds as testing approaches, make sure you're subscribed and notifications are on. We're closing in on 2,000 subscribers, and every single one of you genuinely helps this channel grow. In the next part, we need to zoom out and look at the bigger reason behind all this pressure, because the real problem isn't just preparation time. It's the regulations, the weight limits, and a technical challenge that almost every team is struggling to solve right now. When you start digging into why so many teams are feeling the squeeze at the same time, the picture becomes a lot clearer. This isn't about poor organization or teams suddenly forgetting how to build race cars. The real issue is that the current regulations have created a perfect storm where almost everything is heavier, more complex, and harder to optimize, while the minimum weight limit has moved sharply in the opposite direction. That gap is where all the stress is coming from, and it's why even well-prepared teams are flirting with delays. The power unit is a huge part of this. The engine is heavier than before, yet the overall minimum weight has dropped by a significant margin. On top of that, crash structures and safety requirements are stricter, which means more material, more reinforcement, and more mass that simply cannot be removed. In practical terms, teams aren't just trying to lose a few kilograms here and there. They're effectively being asked to claw back a massive amount of weight while still meeting reliability targets and building a car that actually works across different circuits. Aston Martin has become the clearest example of how widespread this problem is. The talk is that they could start the season well over the weight limit, and while that sounds dramatic, it's not automatically a disaster. We've seen this story before. A certain team once began a season in a similar position and, after methodically shedding weight through upgrades, ended up in a completely different competitive league. That's why being overweight now doesn't necessarily define how strong a team will be later. What it does do is complicate early preparation and make every design decision far more sensitive. This also explains why some teams might accept being slightly late to testing. If you know the first version of the car is compromised by weight, you might decide it's better to spend extra time refining parts rather than rushing something out just to log laps. But that's a risky mindset, because testing isn't only about performance, it's about reliability, systems checks, and understanding how all these new components behave together in the real world. Losing that running can come back to haunt you very quickly. I'm curious how you see this trade-off. Would you rather your team run early with an overweight car just to gather data, or wait a little longer and arrive with something closer to the final vision? Let me know in the comments, because this is exactly the kind of decision that separates bold thinking from costly mistakes. If this breakdown is helping you make sense of the bigger picture, take a second to like the video and subscribe. We're pushing toward 2,000 subscribers, and your support makes it possible to keep covering these stories in detail. Coming up next, we're going to compare how the top teams are approaching this problem very differently, because while some look confident on the surface, others are quietly bracing for a very difficult start to the season. When you compare how the top teams are approaching this situation, the differences are striking. And they tell you a lot about who feels comfortable and who doesn't. On the surface, everyone talks a confident game, but once you listen closely to what team bosses and technical leaders are actually saying, you start to hear hesitation, caution, and in some cases, outright realism about how tough the months ahead could be. McLaren come into this phase with a lot of quiet confidence. They made a very early decision to stop pushing hard on last season's car and shift resources forward, and that gamble paid off when it mattered. Because of that, there's a belief internally that their best version of the car still hasn't been seen yet. That doesn't mean everything is perfect, but it does suggest they're not scrambling in the same way others might be. Preparation, rather than panic, seems to define their approach. Mercedes sit in an interesting middle ground. As a works team, they naturally benefit from tighter integration between chassis and power unit, and that alone can save time and reduce surprises. There's also a sense that they've spent a lot of effort simply interpreting the regulations correctly and laying solid foundations rather than chasing aggressive concepts too early. That kind of groundwork rarely makes headlines, but it often shows up when the season actually starts. It's no surprise that people inside the paddock quietly expect them to be very strong. Red Bull, though, sound different. The language coming from their camp is unusually cautious, even humble by their standards. There's an open admission that difficult months lie ahead, along with sleepless nights and plenty of headaches. That's not the kind of messaging you're used to hearing from a team that's dominated for so long. It suggests they know this. Challenge is deeper than simply bolting on a few upgrades, and that patience may be required, especially if early results don't match expectations. That leads to a fascinating question about the drivers. If you're at the top of your game and suddenly facing a stretch where wins aren't realistic, how long do you stay patient? This is where I want your honest opinion. If you were in that position, would you ride it out, or would you already be thinking about future options? Drop your thoughts below, because this kind of scenario has a habit of reshaping the entire driver market. If you're enjoying this kind of behind-the-scenes breakdown, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications on. We're building toward 2,000 subscribers, and there's a lot more of this story still to come. In the next part, we need to put the spotlight on the team everyone is talking about today, because the rumors, delays, and mixed signals surrounding Ferrari are impossible to ignore. See, Ferrari are right at the center of this conversation, and that's what makes the current rumors feel so heavy. When Ferrari are calm, the paddock tends to be calm. When Ferrari look uncertain, everything gets amplified. Right now, the signals coming out of Maranello are mixed, and that's the most uncomfortable place to be. On one hand, there's talk of wanting to stay under the radar, keep expectations low, and quietly focus on execution. On the other, there are reports of delays, late changes, and a build process that hasn't followed the usual order. What really stands out is the timing of those changes. The drivers have already completed their seat fittings, using the newer scanning-based process. Yet the car itself hasn't fully gone through its fire-up sequence. That alone raises questions, because it suggests that elements of the final package were still being signed off very late. Some sources point to last-minute adjustments to the chassis that required additional testing before approval. That could mean Ferrari uncovered a serious issue they couldn't ignore, or it could mean they found something better and decided to push it into the core design rather than wait for an upgrade window. This is where interpretation matters. If Ferrari identified a fundamental flaw, that's worrying. Teams usually prefer to run a baseline car and evolve it later unless the issue is severe. But if this was a calculated decision to integrate a more aggressive solution from the start, then arriving slightly later could actually be a sign of ambition rather than disarray. The problem is that from the outside, both scenarios look almost identical, and Ferrari's recent history doesn't exactly earn them the benefit of the doubt. The pressure inside the team only adds to the drama. This season carries enormous weight for everyone involved. Leadership stability, driver confidence, and long-term loyalty are all on the line. A strong start settles nerves instantly. A shaky one does the opposite. That's why even small delays feel magnified. They're not just technical setbacks, they're psychological ones too, especially in a team where scrutiny never fades. So let me ask you directly, because Ferrari fans and neutrals usually see this very differently. Do you think Ferrari are being bold with these late changes, or do you think they're simply running behind schedule? Yes or no? Drop your view in the comments. I'm genuinely curious where you land on that. If you're following this story closely, now's a great time to subscribe and like the video. We're pushing toward 2,000 subscribers, and Ferrari's season alone is going to give us no shortage of talking points. In the final part, we'll step back and look at what actually happens if teams miss early testing, whether it truly matters, and how much of this could just be noise before the real running begins.